My own son looked me in the eyes and said, "You're no longer part of my family." After 28 years of washing, cooking, and sacrificing every last penny to raise him alone, Luke decided that I wasn't worthy of his new last name now that he had inherited millions. What he didn't know was that I kept documents that could make that fortune slip through his fingers in 48 hours. When he humiliated me in front of his new rich friends, I realized it was time to show my son that the man he called the little handyman had more power than he could ever imagine. But before continuing, make sure you're already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching this video from. We love knowing how far our stories reach. I felt their gazes as soon as I entered the ballroom. 20 pairs of eyes analyzing me, from my worn shirt bought on sale to my hands roughened by decades of fixing pipes and scrubbing floors. The party hall of the luxury condo shone with its crystal lights, while the guests held glasses that probably cost more than my weekly salary as a maintenance worker. It was my son Luke's 30th birthday, the first since he received the inheritance that changed everything. 6 months ago, Luke discovered he was the sole heir to a distant great-uncle we never knew. Approximately $65 million. Overnight, my son, who grew up sleeping on the living room couch in our one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of East Los Angeles, transformed into one of the most coveted bachelors in Beverly Hills. I crossed the room timidly, looking for my boy. He was in the center of a group, wearing a suit that probably cost more than all the furniture in our old house combined. By his side, an elegant woman with impeccable hair held his arm possessively. Amanda, the girlfriend who mysteriously appeared 2 weeks after the inheritance announcement. "Luke," I called, my voice more trembling than I would have liked. He turned. For an instant, I saw a flash of warm recognition in his eyes. The same boy who ran into my arms when I came back from work. But that flash disappeared quickly, replaced by something cold and distant. "Dad," he said without moving to hug me. "You came?" "Of course I came. It's your birthday." Amanda examined me from head to toe, a polite but distant smile on her perfectly painted lips. "So this is your father. How adorable." Luke seemed uncomfortable, looking around as if fearing someone might be watching. "Dad, do you want something to drink? Maybe you could wait at the corner table while I greet some important guests." "The corner table?" I repeated, confused. "I thought we could spend some time together. I've barely seen you since you moved here." Amanda let out a discreet giggle. "Luke, darling, the ambassador just arrived. We need to greet him." Luke nodded quickly. "Dad, I'm sorry, but I have important guests to receive. Why don't you enjoy the buffet? We'll talk later." Before I could respond, they walked away, leaving me alone in the middle of the room. I noticed some curious looks, some stifled giggles. I walked to the indicated table, in the farthest corner, partially hidden by a huge floral arrangement. An hour passed, then another. Luke circulated through the room, chatting animatedly, laughing loudly but never approaching my table. When a waiter passed with champagne, I tried to take a glass, but he deliberately ignored me. That's when Claude, my lifelong neighbor, the only familiar face at the party besides Luke, sat down next to me. "Thomas, are you okay? You look like you're about to cry." "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "Luke is busy. It's natural." Claude frowned. "It's not natural for him to hide you here like you're a shameful secret." "I saw the waiter ignore you. I talked to Luke about it, and do you know what he told me? That the waiters had instructions to serve only the main guests." I felt as if I'd been slapped. Main guests. "Look, Thomas, I know it's hard to hear, but something's very wrong with Luke since he received this inheritance. Did you see the gift list he requested? He didn't even put your name on it." It was true. When I asked for the list to buy a gift, Luke's secretary informed me that Mr. Thomas was not on the official gift guest list. I ended up buying a tie, the best I could afford, which now seemed ridiculous in my worn bag. "He's just adapting to his new life," I defended automatically, the paternal instinct speaking louder than the pain. At that moment, the lights dimmed, and Luke stepped onto a small stage set up in the center of the room. Everyone approached, forming a circle around him. I stayed where I was, unsure if I should join the group. "Dear friends," Luke began, his voice amplified by the microphone, "I want to thank everyone for being here on this very special night. Today, I'm not only celebrating my 30 years, but the start of a new phase in my life." Polite applause. Luke continued. As you know, I was recently lucky enough to receive an inheritance that allowed me to finally live the life I've always dreamed of. But the true wealth is in the wonderful people I've met since then, people who truly understand me and support my vision. He raised his glass, looking around the circle. I want to especially thank Amanda, who brought light and class into my life. Amanda smiled, accepting the applause with a delicate nod. And my new friends from the business club, who welcomed me like family and showed me a world of possibilities I didn't even know existed. Family. The word hit my heart like a knife. It had been just Luke and me since his mother abandoned us when he was 2 years old. I had been both father and mother, working 3 different jobs so he could study at a decent school. There were nights when I ate only a piece of bread so he could have a full meal. I stood up and walked closer to the circle, stopping at the outer edge. Luke still hadn't mentioned me in his thank you speech. And finally, he continued, I want to thank fate for this opportunity for reinvention, for leaving behind the limitations of the past and embracing an unlimited future. Limitations of the past. That's how he saw our life together, as a limitation. Luke, I called, my voice trembling but loud enough to be heard. Son. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Luke stopped mid-sentence, his gaze meeting mine. I saw something pass across his face. Shame. Irritation. Dad, I'm in the middle of my speech, he said without using the microphone, but loud enough for those closest to hear. I'm sorry, son. I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. Amanda whispered something in a friend's ear, who laughed discreetly. Thanks, Luke replied dryly. Now, as I was saying, Luke, I insisted, taking a step forward, entering the circle. Something inside me needed to be acknowledged. I needed my son to show all those people that I mattered. Aren't you going to introduce me to your new friends? The silence was now absolute. Luke seemed frozen, microphone in hand, eyes fixed on me, as if I were an intruder and not the man who brought him into the world. It was Amanda who broke the silence, approaching with her perfect smile. Of course, where are our manners? Everyone, this is Luke's childhood handyman. Handyman, I repeated in shock. I'm his father. More whispers, curious looks. Amanda kept her plastic smile. Of course, the biological father. Luke told us how he took care of him despite the difficult circumstances. The way she said difficult circumstances made it seem like I'd raised Luke in a sewer, not in a modest but clean and loving apartment in East Los Angeles. Luke finally moved, stepping down from the stage quickly, approaching me with a tense smile that didn't reach his eyes. Dad, this isn't the time. We can talk later. Later when, Luke? It's been 3 months since you barely answer my calls. You moved out without giving me the new address. I had to beg Claude to bring me here today. I felt the gazes, heard whispers. I was causing a scene, but I couldn't stop. 30 years of sacrifice for this son, and now he treated me like an inconvenient stranger. Let's talk outside, Luke said in a low voice, gripping my arm firmly enough to hurt. He guided me to a side terrace, away from the curious eyes. As soon as the door closed behind us, his expression changed completely. What do you think you're doing? He hissed, embarrassing me in front of the most influential people in Beverly Hills. Embarrassing you, Luke? I'm your father. I know who you are, he replied coldly. What I don't understand is why you can't just stay in your corner and let me manage my life my way. Your corner. That's how you see me now, as someone to be hidden, kept at a distance from your shiny new life. Luke ran his hand through his perfectly cut hair, visibly frustrated. Dad, don't you understand? I'm building important connections here, people who can open doors we didn't even know existed. We? There doesn't seem to be a we anymore, Luke. It seems like it's you and your new crowd, and I'm just an embarrassing reminder of where you come from. He didn't deny it. That was the most painful moment, the fact that he didn't deny it. Look, I'm not saying I'm not grateful for everything you did, he said in a tone that sounded rehearsed, but I need you to understand that I'm on another level now. I have an image to maintain, connections to cultivate. And I don't fit in that image, I completed, the reality finally hitting me with full force. Luke averted his. gaze, unable to look me directly in the eye. It's complicated. No, it's not complicated. It's quite simple. In fact, you're ashamed of me. Ashamed of my calloused hands, my cheap shirt, my East Los Angeles accent. You're being dramatic. I'm being honest. Something you seem to have forgotten how to do. The terrace door opened and Amanda appeared, her fake smile firmly in place. Luke, darling, the Montgomerys are asking for you. They need to leave early. Luke nodded, visibly relieved by the interruption. I'm coming. He turned to me. We need to finish this conversation later, Dad. Please, try not to cause any more scenes tonight. Before I could respond, he was already walking away, following Amanda back to the party. The door closed slowly, leaving me alone on the dark terrace, with the muffled sound of the celebration continuing without me. Hot tears ran down my face. How had we reached this point? When had my affectionate boy turned into this cold stranger who saw his own father as an obstacle to his social climb? It was at that moment, alone on the terrace of my son's birthday party, a party I had barely been invited to, that I made a decision. The tears dried, replaced by a determination I didn't know I possessed. Luke had forgotten where he came from. He had forgotten who really cared for him when he had nothing. Maybe it was time to remind him, and I knew exactly how to do it. I returned to the party with my head held high, determined to endure until the end. But the worst was still to come, and I had no idea how deep the humiliation my own son had in store for me would be. When I returned to the party, no one seemed to notice my absence or return. I went back to my table in the corner, watching from afar as Luke circulated the room, the incandescent star around which everyone orbited. He seemed so different now. It wasn't just the expensive suit or the luxury watch on his wrist. It was his posture, his smile, even the way he gestured when speaking. Everything carefully calibrated to resemble the people around him. In just 6 months, my son had transformed into a stranger. I caught myself remembering moments from our life together before the inheritance. The small apartment we shared, where Luke slept in the living room so I could have the only bedroom. The nights we stayed up playing cards when the power went out because we couldn't afford to pay the bill. His graduation from the state university where he commuted 4 hours every day because we couldn't afford a dorm. We had been happy despite the hardships, or at least that's what I thought. My thoughts were interrupted when the waiter, the same one who had ignored me earlier, finally approached my table. "Sir," he said without looking me in the eyes, "Mr. Cardoso requests your presence by the cake." I stood up, my heart racing. Maybe Luke had reconsidered. Maybe he wanted to include me in the special moment, to publicly acknowledge the father who had sacrificed everything for him. I followed the waiter to the center of the room, where an impressive 5-tier cake had been positioned. Luke was there, arm around Amanda's waist, while the photographer positioned groups for official photos. "Luke," I called softly, approaching. "Did you call for me?" He turned, seeming momentarily confused. "Call?" The waiter leaned in to whisper something in his ear. Luke nodded, remembering. Yes," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I thought maybe you'd want to help serve the cake." "Serve?" I repeated, not sure if I'd heard correctly. "Yes, you were always excellent at that kind of thing. Organized, efficient." I stood frozen, trying to process what I was hearing. My son hadn't called me to participate in the celebration. He had called me to serve the guests like an employee. "Luke," I began, my voice low so only he could hear. "Do you want your father to work at your birthday party?" He seemed uncomfortable, quickly glancing around to check if anyone was listening. "It's not work, Dad, it's just helping." "I thought you'd like to feel useful. I know how much you enjoy taking care of things." The words came out of my mouth before I could hold them back. "Like your maintenance man." Luke opened his mouth to respond, but it was Amanda who spoke, approaching with her perfect smile. "Thomas, isn't it? Luke mentioned you have a lot of experience serving at events. We have many important guests here, so your help would be appreciated." I looked at my son, hoping, silently begging him to correct the situation, to tell Amanda and everyone present that I was his father, the man who had worked 3 jobs so he could have a decent education, who had gone without dinner countless nights so he could eat. But he remained silent, avoiding my gaze. "Luke," I tried once more, my voice barely a whisper.
Please don't do this to me. Something changed in his face then, a hardness I'd never seen before. He leaned in, speaking low so only I could hear. Look, Dad, I'm going to be honest. You're embarrassing me. These people are important to me, to my future. They don't need to know about before the inheritance, before I was who I really should be. Each word was like a knife in my heart. And who should you really be, Luke? Someone who's ashamed of his own father. He looked around nervously, noticing that some people were starting to watch our tense conversation. Can we discuss this later? Now's not the time. When is the time, Luke? You've been avoiding me for months. Amanda approached again, sensing the tension. Is everything okay here? Luke forced a smile. Everything's great. Thomas was just... He paused, and I saw something decide in his eyes before continuing, explaining that he can't help tonight. Amanda frowned delicately. Oh, what a shame. Well, I'm sure the buffet team can manage. She turned to me, her gaze assessing me from head to toe. It must be so gratifying for you to see how Luke overcame his origins, a true rags to riches story. The words were polite, but the meaning behind them was crystal clear. I was the origins, something to be overcome, left behind, forgotten. Indeed, I replied, finding a strength I didn't know I had. I'm very proud of the man I raised alone, the man I taught to be honest, respectful, and grateful. Amanda's smile faltered slightly. Luke looked like he wanted the ground to swallow.
Him. Dad, he said, his voice tense. Please. It was the way he said, please. Not as a plea, but as an order to shut up, to not ruin the carefully constructed facade that finally broke something inside me. Okay, Luke, I responded, my voice surprisingly calm. I won't embarrass you anymore. I turned to leave, but stopped when I heard Amanda speaking to another guest without bothering to lower her voice. He's the handyman who raised him. Can you imagine? Luke practically raised himself. It's a miracle he turned out so refined, considering, well, you know. I turned slowly, my whole body trembling. Luke had heard. I could see by the way his shoulders tensed, but he said nothing. He didn't defend me, didn't correct the lie. Handyman, I repeated, my voice louder than intended. Several people turned to look. Amanda smiled carelessly. Oh, sorry, Thomas, I didn't mean to offend. It's a perfectly respectable job. I wasn't Luke's handyman, I said clearly so everyone could hear. I'm his father. An uncomfortable silence fell over the nearby group. Amanda seemed genuinely surprised before quickly composing herself. Of course, that's what I meant. The father who worked as a handyman, so dedicated. She was trying to save the situation, but the damage was already done. I looked at Luke, hoping once more that he would intervene, defend me. Instead, he stepped forward, placing himself slightly between me and the group, as if trying to hide me. Dad, he said in a low but firm voice, I think you should leave. Clearly, this environment is making you uncomfortable. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own son was kicking me out of his birthday party. Making me uncomfortable, I repeated incredulously. What makes me uncomfortable is seeing my son pretending to be someone he's not, ashamed of the man who sacrificed everything for him. You're exaggerating, he whispered furiously. You're turning this into something it's not. And what is this exactly? You don't understand. These are my friends now, my real family, people who understand me, who share my interests and ambitions. His real family. The words hit me like a physical punch. Luke, I managed to say, my voice breaking. I am your family. He looked around nervously, noticing we had a growing audience. Look, he said, lowering his voice even more. I love you, Dad. You know that, but you don't fit here. This is my world now, and there's no place for me in it. His silence was answer enough. I understand, I said finally, fighting back the tears threatening to fall. Are you ashamed of me? It's not about shame, he tried to explain, but without conviction. It's about fitting in. Fitting in, I repeated, the word bitter in my mouth. And I don't fit in your new life. He didn't respond, and his silence said it all. In that moment, something changed inside me. The pain was so intense, it transformed into something else, a coldness, a determination I'd never felt before. Okay, Luke, I said, my voice surprisingly firm. "I'll respect your wish. I won't bother you anymore with my inadequate presence." I grabbed my bag from the corner table and started walking toward the exit. Luke seemed momentarily surprised by my sudden compliance. "Dad, wait," he called, following me to the door. "I don't want you to leave like this." I stopped and turned. "How do you want me to leave, Luke? Through the back door so no one sees me?" He didn't respond, but his guilty look said it all. "You know," I continued, keeping my voice low but clear, "I'm very proud of everything I did for you, the sleepless nights, the 3 jobs, the meals I skipped so you could eat. I thought you were too. Dad, please. But now I see I was wrong. You're not proud of our life together. You're ashamed of it, ashamed of me." He tried to argue, but I raised my hand to silence him. "It's all right, son. I understand. You have a new life now, new people who are more fitting. I'll respect that and stay out of your way." "That's not what I want," he protested weakly. But we both knew it was a lie. I took the small package from my bag, containing the tie I'd bought for him, the best I could afford, and placed it in his hands. "Happy birthday, Luke." I started to walk away, but he grabbed my arm. "Dad, don't you understand? This inheritance is a chance to finally have the life we deserve. You don't have to work anymore. I can take care of you." I turned slowly. "Take care of me, like you took care of me today. Hiding me in a corner, letting your girlfriend call me a handyman, suggesting I serve the cake. He at least had the decency to look ashamed. It was a misunderstanding. Look, I can buy you an apartment, pay your bills. You'll never need to work again." I looked at this elegant stranger who was once my boy and felt a sadness deeper than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. "You really don't understand, do you? I don't want your money, Luke. I want your respect. I want you to acknowledge who I am. Your father, not an inconvenience to be managed." He opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by Amanda, who appeared at his side, slipping her arm through his. "Luke, darling, they're waiting for you to cut the cake," she said, giving me a polite but cold smile. "Thomas, you're leaving already. What a shame. But I understand. It must be exhausting for you to stay up late." I looked at Amanda, then at Luke, who remained silent, once again allowing her to treat me with condescension. "Yes," I replied, straightening my shoulders. "I'm leaving. I have a lot to do tomorrow." I turned and walked toward the exit, aware of the gazes and whispers following me. When I reached the door, I couldn't help but look back one last time. Luke had already returned to the center of the room, arm around Amanda's waist, smiling at the crowd as they prepared to sing happy birthday. He didn't look in my direction. It was as if I no longer existed for him. I stepped out into the night, the tears finally escaping. But amid the pain, something else was growing. A resolve, a certainty. Luke had shown me who he really was now. And it was time for me to show him who I really was, because there was a secret that neither he nor anyone at that party knew. A secret kept in a small box of documents in my apartment. A secret that could make his entire glamorous new life crumble in a matter of days. As I walked alone down the dark street, I made my decision. Luke had chosen his new family over the only person who had always been by his side. Now he would face the consequences of that choice. The bus swayed through the city's neighborhoods, taking me from Luke's luxury condo in Beverly Hills back to my small apartment in the suburb of East Los Angeles. Sitting alone in the back seat, I let the tears flow freely, not caring about the occasional glances from the other few passengers. How had we reached this point? When had my son, my Luke, turned into this cold-eyed stranger who was ashamed of his own father? I remembered the little boy who ran into my arms when I returned from work, who made birthday cards with colored paper and glued pasta because we had no money for gifts. The teenager who insisted on working part-time to help with the bills, even when I tried to convince him to focus only on his studies. The Luke I knew valued family above all, because we only had each other. When had that boy turned into the man who humiliated me tonight? When I arrived at my old building, I climbed the 4 flights of stairs on foot. The elevator was broken again. My apartment was small but clean and cozy. For years, it had been the happy home for Luke and me. Now it seemed just empty. At the kitchen table, I opened the small box where I kept our important documents. Certificates, rental contracts, insurance policies, the papers of a modest but honest life. At the bottom of the box, I found the yellowish envelope I was looking for. It was old, the edges worn by time, but its contents could change everything. I opened it carefully, rereading the pages I'd kept for so long. Documents from a story I'd never told Luke, the full truth about his mother and the inheritance he now flaunted with such pride. Roberta Vasquez hadn't simply abandoned us both, as I'd always told Luke. The truth was much more complicated. Roberta came from a traditional family, the Vasquezes, owners of a network of luxury hotels and resorts across the country. When we met, she was rebellious, as she herself said, distanced from the family she considered oppressive and materialistic. She worked as a waitress in the restaurant where I was a cleaner, pretending to be just an ordinary girl. We fell in love, young and naive. When she got pregnant, Roberta initially stayed by my side, promising we'd form a family. But when she told her parents, everything changed. The Vasquezes did what rich families always do. They offered money for me to disappear. Roberta resisted for a while, but eventually gave in to the family pressure. The last time I saw her, she handed me an envelope with enough money for a few months and a farewell letter. I rejected the money out of pride, sending it back by mail, but I kept the letter along with newspaper clippings about the Vasquez family and documents proving Roberta was Luke's mother, including a paternity test I'd obtained through a pro bono lawyer when Luke was 5 years old. There was one more document in the envelope, the most important of all, a copy of a confidentiality agreement that Augustus Vasquez, the patriarch, had sent me a few weeks after Luke's birth. The agreement stipulated that I would receive a considerable amount if I promised never to reveal that Luke was a Vasquez, never to seek out the family, and never to tell my son the truth. I had signed the agreement, but not for the money, which I rejected again. I signed because I wanted to protect Luke from rejection. I didn't want my son to grow up knowing his mother and maternal family didn't want him. It was better, I thought at the time, to let him believe his mother had died than to know he'd been rejected. For years, I followed that agreement to the letter, raising Luke alone, telling him his mother had abandoned us when he was a baby and then died in an accident. A white lie, I thought, to protect his heart. What Luke didn't know, what no one knew, was that the distant great-uncle who supposedly left him the inheritance was actually Augustus Vasquez, his maternal grandfather. A few months earlier, I'd received an unexpected call from the Vasquez's old lawyer. Augustus was dying and, regretting having rejected his only grandson, had decided to include him in his will, but with one condition. Luke could never know who he really was or how he was truly related to the Vasquez family. Officially, it would be presented only as a distant relative who inexplicably decided to leave a fortune to a young man he'd never met. I had agreed, thinking that finally Luke would have access to the opportunities he always deserved. I never imagined the money would change him so profoundly, turning him into the kind of person who would reject his own father out of shame for his humble origins. The irony was cruel. Luke now despised his origins without knowing that it was exactly that behavior his maternal grandfather had shown 30 years ago, rejecting the poor son-in-law. And the illegitimate grandson. Now, holding these documents in my hands, I had power. Power to expose the truth. Power to show Luke that his precious inheritance came from the same family that had tried to prevent his birth. Power to reveal that the confidentiality agreement I'd signed included a specific clause. If Luke's true identity as a Vasquez heir was revealed by anyone, he would lose all rights to the inheritance. In other words, if I told Luke the truth about his origin, all that money that had turned my loving son into an arrogant stranger would disappear instantly. I spent the entire night awake, staring at those documents, thinking about what I should do. Part of me wanted revenge. I wanted to see Luke lose everything, forced back to reality, maybe even needing my help again. I wanted him to taste the bitter rejection he'd made me feel. But another part, the part that would always be a father no matter what, hesitated. I'd spent my entire life protecting Luke, putting his needs above mine. Could I destroy his new life, even after how he'd treated me? The next morning, with red, swollen eyes from crying so much, I made my decision. I put the documents in my bag and left for work. Maintenance in 3 different buildings, the routine that had sustained Luke and me for so many years. While I fixed leaks, scrubbed floors, and organized tools, my mind kept returning to the scene from the previous night. My friends now, my real family, Luke had said. The words still burned. At the end of the day, exhausted and sore, I took a bus to the address I'd memorized, the law firm that managed Augustus Vasquez's estate. If I wanted answers, I'd have to start there. The building was impressive, all glass and steel in the heart of the city's financial district. I felt out of place entering the luxurious lobby in my work uniform, carrying my worn bag. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, her tone polite but distant, eyes assessing my appearance. "I need to speak with Dr. Henry Mendez," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "About the Vasquez estate." She raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's urgent. Tell him Thomas Cardoso is here, the father of Luke Cardoso." Something in my determination must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation, because after a brief call, I was led to an elevator and then to an office on the 10th floor. Dr. Mendez was older than I'd expected, perhaps close to 70, with gray hair and thick framed glasses. He stood up when I entered, a cautious smile on his face. "Mr. Cardoso, what a surprise. Please, sit down." I sat in the chair across from his imposing desk, placing my bag on my lap. "Doctor, I came to talk about my son Luke and the agreement I signed with Augustus Vasquez 30 years ago." He adjusted his glasses, looking at me more closely. "I see. I must remind you that the agreement is still in effect. The confidentiality clause is absolute." "I'm aware of the terms," I interrupted. "What I want to know is if Augustus left any message for Luke, something personal, besides the money." Dr. Mendez hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Why are you asking this now, Mr. Cardoso?" "Because my son is turning into exactly the kind of person his grandfather was. Someone who despises people like me for their social class, and I believe he has the right to know the truth about his heritage." The lawyer's expression turned more serious. "Mr. Cardoso, I must warn you that any revelation about the true relationship between Luke and the Vasquez family would result in the immediate loss of the entire inheritance. Is that what you want for your son?" "What I want," I replied calmly, "is my son back. The boy I raised to be honest, compassionate, and grateful. Not this stranger who's ashamed of his own father." Dr. Mendez studied me for a long moment before opening a drawer in his desk. From it, he pulled a sealed envelope. "Augustus left this for Luke with specific instructions that it should only be delivered if certain circumstances occurred." "What circumstances?" "If Luke showed the kind of arrogance and elitism you described. Augustus feared the money might corrupt the grandson he never knew. This envelope contains a letter explaining everything. Who Luke really is, why he was rejected in the past, and how Augustus regretted that decision in his final years." I looked at the envelope, feeling its symbolic weight. "And if Luke reads this, he'll lose the inheritance." Dr. Mendez confirmed. That was the condition imposed by Henry Vasquez, Augustus's son and Luke's uncle, to agree to including the nephew in the will. Henry never wanted Luke to be recognized as a true Vasquez. The compromise Augustus got was to leave the money to Luke as long as the true relationship remained secret. "So I have a choice," I murmured, more to myself than to him. "I can keep the secret and let Luke continue his new life, even if it means losing him forever. Or I can reveal the truth and bring him back to reality, but destroy everything he's built with that money." Dr. Mendez nodded gravely. "It's a difficult choice for any father." I extended my hand toward the envelope. "May I?" He hesitated. "Technically, this belongs to Luke, and I'll give it to him," I promised. "I just want to know what it says before making my final decision." After a moment of consideration, Dr. Mendez pushed the envelope toward me. "I'm not officially giving this to you. I'm just allowing you to see its contents to make an informed decision." I nodded, grateful for his understanding. I opened the envelope carefully, finding several handwritten pages in an elegant but fragile calligraphy, the last words of a dying man to the grandson he never knew. The letter began with a confession, Augustus's regret for forcing Roberta to abandon her pregnant lower-class boyfriend 30 years ago. It described how Roberta never fully recovered from that decision, falling into a spiral of alcoholism that eventually killed her in a car accident 10 years later, something I never knew as I'd cut all ties with the Vasquez family. Augustus wrote about how, in his final years, he'd hired investigators to find the unknown grandson, discovering a hard-working young man raised by a dedicated single father. He expressed admiration for me for raising Luke alone, rejecting the Vasquez money out of pride and principles. The most revealing part, however, was the warning. "If you're reading this, Luke, It's because something went wrong. The money I left you, which I believed was a way to compensate for our family's abandonment, has somehow corrupted the good man your father raised. Maybe you've forgotten where you come from. Maybe you've forgotten who really matters. The final words were like a stab. If you've become the kind of man who despises people like your father for their social class, then you've become exactly like I was. And I spent my last years bitterly regretting it. In that case, maybe it's better that you lose this inheritance. Money earned without effort rarely brings lasting happiness and often reveals the worst parts of ourselves. I finished reading with tears in my eyes. It was as if Augustus Vasquez had foreseen exactly what would happen. "What do you plan to do, Mr. Cardoso?" Dr. Mendez asked softly as I returned the letter to the envelope. I wiped my tears and straightened my shoulders. I'm going to give my son a chance to choose who he really wants to be. I arrived at Luke's new apartment early the next evening. It was a stunning penthouse in one of the most exclusive buildings in Beverly Hills. The kind of place I could never dream of visiting, let alone entering, before the inheritance. The doorman initially hesitated to let me up, looking suspiciously at my simple shirt and worn bag. I had to insist that I was the father of Mr. Cardoso and that he was expecting me. A small lie, since Luke had no idea I was coming. When I finally reached his door and rang the bell, I prepared myself for what was to come. Augustus Vasquez's envelope weighed in my bag, like a bomb about to explode. The door opened, revealing not Luke, but Amanda, wearing an elegant dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my salary. Her expression shifted from surprise to displeasure in seconds. "Thomas, what are you doing here?" "I came to see my son," I replied simply, maintaining my composure. "It's urgent." "Luke is busy right now. We're hosting some friends for dinner." She glanced at my clothes. "It's a formal occasion." "I didn't come for dinner," I clarified. "I need to talk to him privately. Please, Amanda, it's really important." She hesitated, visibly uncomfortable with my presence, when Luke appeared behind her, adjusting his tuxedo tie. "Amanda, who is it?" he began, stopping when he saw me. "Dad, what are you doing here? We need to talk, Luke, privately." He glanced over his shoulder into the apartment, where voices and laughter indicated the presence of guests. "Now's not a good time. We're hosting important people for dinner. It's about your inheritance," I insisted, "and it's urgent." Something in my tone must have conveyed the seriousness, because after a moment of hesitation, Luke nodded slightly. "Amanda, tell the guests I'll be right back. I'm going to talk to my father in the office." Amanda seemed like she wanted to protest, but limited herself to giving me an icy look before returning to the dinner. Luke led me down a hallway to an elegant room with bookshelves that seemed never to have been opened and a noble wood desk that looked more like a display piece than a workspace. "What's so urgent it couldn't wait until tomorrow?" he asked as soon as he closed the door, his irritated tone barely disguised. "Sit down, Luke," I requested, my voice calmer than I expected. "What I have to tell you will take some time. Dad, I have guests waiting. Guests who are more important than your own father, your real family, as you said last night." He had the decency to look ashamed. "Look, about yesterday, maybe I was a bit harsh. I was under pressure with all those important guests. Too important to be seen with the handyman who raised you," I completed for him. Luke sighed, running his hand through his perfectly styled hair. "It's not that simple, Dad. You don't understand how it works in this circle. Appearances matter, connections matter, and I'm an inconvenient appearance, an embarrassing connection to your poor past." "I didn't say that," he protested, but without conviction. "You didn't need to say it," I replied. "Your actions made it very clear last night, and in all the months since you received this inheritance." Luke finally sat down, looking tired. "What do you want, Dad?" "Money. I already said I can buy you an apartment, pay your bills. You'll never need to work as a handyman again." "I don't want your money, Luke. I never did." "Then what do you want?" "I want you to know the truth about that inheritance, about who you really are." He frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" I opened my bag and took out Augustus Vasquez's envelope along with the other documents I'd kept for so many years. I placed them on the table between us. "Your distant great-uncle wasn't a remote relative. He was your maternal grandfather, Augustus Vasquez." Luke froze, his eyes fixed on the documents. "What? That doesn't make sense. My mother died when I was a baby."
You always said she had no family. Another lie I told to protect you. I admitted, guilt weighing in my voice. Your mother was Roberta Vasquez, Augustus's youngest daughter. When she got pregnant, the Vasquez family offered me money to disappear. Money I rejected. Roberta, pressured by the family, eventually abandoned me. She died a few years later in a car accident after years of alcoholism. Luke took the documents with trembling hands, scanning the evidence I'd gathered, the paternity test, the newspaper clippings about the Vasquez family, Roberta's farewell letter. "Why did you never tell me this?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "To protect your heart. I thought it was better for you to believe your mother had died than to know she and her family rejected you because of my social status," Luke continued.
Examining the documents, his expression oscillating between shock, anger, and confusion. And this inheritance. Why did Augustus suddenly decide to leave me all this after rejecting me for 30 years? "Regret," I replied simply. "In his final years, he hired investigators to find you. He discovered the good man you'd become, raised by a single father who refused the Vasquez money out of pride. He admired that." I pointed to the still unopened envelope. "He left this letter for you with specific instructions on when it should be delivered." Luke took the envelope, looking at me with distrust. "What instructions?" "The letter should only be delivered if the money changed you, if you became the kind of person who despises others for their social class." I paused, letting the words sink in. "The kind of person who's ashamed of his own father." He paled, the implications of my words clearly hitting him. "Is there anything else I need to know?" I continued. "The inheritance came with a condition. You'd only keep the money as long as you didn't know your true identity as Augustus Vasquez's grandson. If the truth was revealed by anyone, you'd lose everything immediately." Luke stood up abruptly, stepping away from the table as if the documents could bite him. "So why are you telling me this now? To punish me? To make me lose everything?" "I'm telling you because you have the right to know the truth, and because I need to find out who my son really is. The boy I raised to value family above all, or the man who humiliated me in front of strangers because he was ashamed of my calloused hands." "Are you giving me an ultimatum?" he accused, his voice shaking with anger. "Either I behave the way you want, or you reveal this story and I lose everything." "No, Luke, I'm giving you a choice. The same choice I had 30 years ago when I rejected the Vasquez money to keep my dignity." I pointed to the envelope on the table. "Read your grandfather's letter. Then decide who you really want to be." Luke stared at the envelope for a long moment before picking it up with hesitant hands. I watched in silence as he broke the seal and pulled out the pages, his eyes scanning the words written by the grandfather he never knew. I saw the emotions cross his face as he read. Surprise, pain, anger, and finally something that looked like shame. When he finished, he placed the pages carefully on the table and remained silent, staring into space. "Luke," I called softly after a few moments. He raised his eyes to me, and in shock, I realized they were filled with tears. I became exactly like them, didn't I? The same people who rejected you for being poor, who tried to buy your silence, who abandoned me even before I was born. I didn't respond, letting him reach his own conclusions. "Last night," he continued, his voice choked, "when Amanda called you a handyman, when I suggested you serve the cake. God, what kind of person does that to his own father?" "Money changes people, son," I said softly. "Sometimes it reveals who we really are beneath all the layers." "I don't want to be that person," he said, shaking his head. "I don't want to be a Vasquez if it means treating others as inferior. I don't want a penny of that money if the price is losing the only person who's always been by my side, no matter what." My heart filled with a mix of pride and relief. Maybe my Luke was still there, beneath the elegant and cold facade. "And if you lose everything?" I asked. "The penthouse, the cars, the new friends, Amanda, because they'll leave Luke when the money's gone." He looked at the closed door, behind which his important guests waited, and then back at me. For a moment, I saw the conflict in his eyes, the desire for the luxurious world he'd experienced in the last months, battling the values I'd taught him. Finally, he took a deep breath and reached for Augustus's letter again. My grandfather was right. Money earned without effort rarely brings lasting happiness. It only revealed the worst in me. "So what are you going to do?" I asked.
Luke looked at the documents scattered on the table, evidence of a history of rejection, pride, and regret spanning generations. Then, to my surprise, he began gathering them carefully. "I'm going to do what I should have done from the beginning," he said, his voice firmer. "I'm going to choose my family, my real family." He stood up, holding the documents, and walked to the door. For a moment I thought he was leaving, but instead he opened it and said, "Amanda, can you come here for a moment and bring all the guests, please?" "Luke," I protested, alarmed. "What are you doing?" He gave me a small smile, the first genuine smile I'd seen on his face in months. What I should have done last night, introduce my father with the pride he deserves. The minutes that followed were surreal. Amanda entered the office, followed by about 10 people in formal attire, all with expressions of polite curiosity and slight impatience. I recognized some faces from the birthday party, the kind of people Luke now considered his real family. "Luke, darling, what's going on?" Amanda asked, her smile fixed, barely hiding her irritation. "The guests are waiting to start dinner." Luke stepped forward, positioning himself beside me, and to my surprise, put his arm around my shoulders. "I want to introduce someone very special to me," he said, his voice clear and strong. "This is Thomas Cardoso, my father, the man who worked 3 different jobs to raise me alone, the man who skipped meals so I could eat, the man who taught me everything that really matters in life." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Amanda looked at Luke as if he'd lost his mind. "Luke," she said quietly, "everyone already knows your father. Can this wait until after dinner?" "No, it can't," he replied firmly, "because I have another announcement to make. I've just learned some important information about my inheritance and I need to share it with all of you." The interest in the room visibly increased. Anything related to money always captured this group's attention. "My distant great-uncle wasn't a remote relative," Luke continued. "He was my maternal grandfather, Augustus Vasquez, who rejected me even before I was born because my father didn't have the right social status." Surprised murmurs ran through the group. The Vasquez name clearly meant something to these people. "The inheritance came with a condition," Luke went on, holding up the documents in his hand. "If my true identity as Augustus Vasquez's grandson was revealed, I'd lose all the money immediately." Amanda stepped forward, alarmed. "Luke, what are you doing? Is this some kind of joke?" "It's no joke, Amanda," he replied calmly. "I'm publicly revealing that I'm Luke Vasquez, the legitimate grandson of Augustus Vasquez, which means that as of this moment I'm no longer a millionaire." The silence that followed was absolute. All eyes in the room were fixed on Luke, expressions ranging from shock to disbelief. "You can't be serious," Amanda finally said, her perfect smile completely gone. "Why would you do something so stupid?" "Because I realized the money turned me into the kind of person who despises others for their social class, the kind of person who's ashamed of his own father." Luke looked at me with genuine remorse. "The kind of person I've always despised." One of the guests cleared her throat delicately. "Maybe we should come back another time." "No need," Luke said. "In fact, dinner is canceled. I suggest you all go home." The guests began to leave awkwardly, murmuring apologies and casting curious glances. Only Amanda remained, her face a mask of contained fury. "You've gone mad," she hissed once we were alone. "You just threw away $65 million. Why?" "Because I finally understood what my grandfather was trying to teach me," Luke responded. "That money earned without effort often reveals the worst in us." And he was right. In just 6 months, I turned into someone I don't recognize anymore. Amanda let out a bitter laugh. "How touching. And now we're going back to that tiny apartment in East Los Angeles. I'll trade my designer dresses for secondhand clothes." "There won't be a we, Amanda," Luke said softly. "I think we both know you're not interested in a man without $65 million in the bank." Her face hardened. "You're going to regret this, Luke. When the reality of poverty hits you again, when you're back in your mediocre job living in that miserable apartment, you'll remember this moment and realize what you threw away." Luke smiled sadly. "Maybe, but at least I'll have my dignity and my father." Amanda looked at me with poorly disguised contempt. "I hope he's worth $65 million. With that, she turned on her heels and left, the door slamming violently behind her. We stood in silence for a moment, processing what had just happened. Luke turned to me, suddenly looking much younger and more vulnerable. "Dad, I'm sorry for everything, for how I treated you, for the things I said. There aren't enough apologies in the world." "There are," I replied softly. "You just gave them by choosing your real family." He pulled me into a tight hug, the first in months that felt genuine without haste or emotional distance. I felt his tears wetting my shoulder. "What am I going to do now?" he murmured. "I ruined everything. I quit my job when I got the inheritance. I spent a fortune on things I can't keep." I pulled away gently, holding his face in my hands as I used to when he was little and scared. "We'll
start over one day at a time, together, like we always did." That night, Luke came home with me to the small apartment that had been our home for so many years in East Los Angeles. He slept on the old living room couch, just like he used to before the inheritance. The next day, we began to rebuild. The transition wasn't easy. In a few days, the news spread. Luke Cardoso, the new millionaire who had made a splash in Beverly Hills social circles, had lost everything. Calls from his new friends stopped abruptly. Amanda blocked his number. The penthouse apartment, the luxury cars, the expensive watches, everything was taken away when the Vasquez family lawyers executed the will's clause. Dr. Mendez, Augustus's lawyer, came personally to our apartment a week later to finalize the paperwork. "I must say I'm impressed," he commented as Luke signed the waiver documents. "Few would have the courage to do what you did." "It wasn't courage," Luke replied, looking at me. "It was just the right thing." Dr. Mendez smiled slightly, adjusting his glasses. Augustus would have been proud. As the lawyer was leaving, he hesitated at the door as if remembering something. "Ah, I almost forgot. There's a small provision in the will that wasn't affected by the revelation of your identity." He pulled an envelope from his briefcase. "Augustus left a separate savings account for continued education, about $100,000. It's not much compared to what you had, but it could be useful if you want to go back to college, maybe do a graduate degree." Luke took the envelope, surprised. "I thought I'd lose everything." The main clause referred to the primary inheritance. This account was set up separately with different conditions. Dr. Mendez smiled. "Maybe Augustus hoped you'd do exactly what you did and wanted to ensure a small cushion for the fresh start." After he left, Luke looked at the envelope, then at me. "It's strange. I don't feel any regret. $65 million, and I don't miss it. Because now you understand what your grandfather tried to teach you," I replied. "That money isn't the same as worth." In the months that followed, Luke truly started over. He used the educational provision money to start a small business, a renovation and construction company inspired by the years we worked together, fixing things in our apartment because we couldn't afford professionals. He hired people from the neighborhood, many of them unemployed for years. Claude, our neighbor who had remained loyal even during the tough times, became his partner. They started small, renovating kitchens and bathrooms, but soon landed bigger contracts. Luke worked harder than ever, waking before dawn, coming home after dark, his hands calloused again from the work. But there was a satisfaction in his eyes that easy money had never brought. One night, about a year after what we came to call the Great Revelation, we were sitting on our small balcony sharing a bottle of cheap wine and watching the sunset. Luke's business had just landed its biggest contract yet, the complete renovation of a school building in the city center. "You know," he said, contemplating his glass, "that letter from my grandfather makes me think every day." "Which part?" "The part where he said he spent his last years regretting how he treated people, how he judged you by your social status, not your character." Luke paused. "I'm glad I didn't have to wait until my deathbed to learn that lesson." I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest that no material wealth could provide. "Augustus would have been proud of the man you've become. I know I am." Luke raised his glass in a silent toast. "To family, the real one." "To family," I repeated, clinking my glass with his. That night, looking at my son, not the elegant, cold stranger the money had created, but the genuine, compassionate man I'd raised, I felt deep gratitude, not for what we'd lost, but for what we'd regained. 3 years later, Luke's company had grown to employ 30 people. We still lived in the same neighborhood, though we'd moved to a slightly larger apartment in the same building.
It wasn't luxurious, but it was comfortable. And more importantly, it was bought with honestly earned money. On a Sunday afternoon during a barbecue we were hosting on the building's community terrace, Luke pulled me to a quiet corner, looking nervous. "Dad, I need to tell you something," he said, fiddling with the edge of his glass. "What's wrong?" I asked, worried by his serious expression. "I got a call from Dr. Mendez last week. Apparently Henry Vasquez, my uncle, passed away." "I'm sorry," I replied, unsure how to react to news about a man Luke had never known. "It's not that," Luke continued. "Dr. Mendez said Henry left a letter for me and an offer."
"What kind of offer?" Luke took a deep breath. "He wants me to take over his share in the Vasquez family businesses, to officially become a Vasquez and inherit not just the money, but the responsibility for the businesses, the employees, everything." I remained silent for a moment, absorbing the news. "And what are you going to do?" "I don't know," he admitted. 3 years ago, I would have jumped at this opportunity without thinking, but now..." He looked around at his friends and employees chatting and laughing on the terrace. "Now I have something I built with my own hands, something that has meaning. Whatever your decision, I'll support you," I assured him. Luke smiled, holding my hand. "You know what the best part of Henry's letter was? He said he'd watched our progress over the last few years, saw how I built my business from scratch, how I treated my employees with respect, how I stayed true to my roots." He paused. "And how I honored my father." I felt tears forming in my eyes. "The offer isn't out of pity or late reconciliation," Luke continued. "It's because he believes I have what it takes to lead the company, not despite my humble origins, but because of them." At that moment I realized we'd come full circle. The family that had rejected Luke for his origins now wanted him exactly because of them, because of the values I'd taught him, the work ethic we'd developed together, the integrity he'd shown when he chose his father over millions. "I'm thinking of accepting," Luke said after a moment. "Not for the money or the Vasquez name, but for the opportunity to make a difference on a larger scale, to create more jobs, to implement policies that truly value people, not just profit." "I think that would be a wise decision," I replied, "and I believe your grandfather would be proud." Luke smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his whole face. "Only if you come with me as a special consultant for integrity and family values matters." I laughed, shaking my head. "I don't know anything about corporate business, son." "But you know everything about what really matters," he replied, getting serious. "About choosing dignity over easy money, about valuing people for who they are, not what they have, about the true meaning of family." I looked at my son, the boy I'd raised, the man he'd become, the journey we'd traveled together, and felt a wave of pride so intense it nearly took my breath away. "So," Luke said, extending his hand, "what do you say? Ready for a new adventure?" I took his hand, feeling the calluses earned from honest work, so similar to my own. "Always, son. Always." As we returned to the party, to the people who had stood by us through good times and bad, I reflected on the strange journey life had given us, how an inheritance that should have been a blessing nearly destroyed my son, how losing everything was actually the start of a much greater gain. Luke had learned the most valuable lesson, that respect can't be bought, that true family stays in tough times, and that a person's character isn't defined by the size of their bank account, but by the choices they make when faced with adversity. And I had learned that sometimes losing a son to arrogance and elitism may not be the end of the story, that with love, patience, and the courage to face difficult truths, it's possible to recover what seemed lost forever. On that sunny afternoon, surrounded by people who loved us for who we were, not what we possessed, I finally felt the circle was complete. The rejected father had regained his son, and we had both discovered the true meaning of wealth. Now, if you like this story, click on this next video appearing on the screen, because in it there's a story of betrayal and turnaround like you've never seen before. Yes,